Hi there, welcome to Lilly-Tree. Today we're making this wire wrap pendant with a large bead. I'm using a gorgeous piece of abalone. And if you want to see more techniques and tutorials like this one, hit that subscribe button. Now let's get wrapping. For this project, we're using 1mm diameter or 18 gauge wire, 0.4mm diameter, which is 26 gauge wire, and a large puffy oval bead. This is a lovely piece of abalone and has a hole running top to bottom. This bead's 5cm long by 3.5cm wide, which is about 2 inches long by just under 1.5 inches wide. But you could adapt the design to a different size if you wanted. And we just need the basic tools, so chain or flat nose pliers, round nose pliers, wire cutting pliers and an awl. For this project we're using 3 pieces of the 1mm or 18 gauge wire, 2 that are 28cm or 11 inches long, and 1 that's 35cm or 14 inches long. The longer piece is the one that's going to go through the bead. And I've got about 3 meters of the 0.4 or 26 gauge weaving wire, and I want to start 1 meter along. So we want to find the middle of that longest wire and wrap our weaving wire a couple of times around it to secure. Then I'm going to add in my other 2 base wires, and I want to match them to the end of that first wire. Now the longest wire is at the top, and I want to wrap that and the second wire down twice, then come up through between them, wrap the bottom 2 wires twice, come up between them, and then wrap the top 2 wires twice. And we're going to use this 2-2 weave up the side of the pendant. So we'll continue wrapping the top 2 wires twice, then through between them, then the bottom 2 wires twice, through between them, and back to the top 2 wires twice. As we go along, the wires can form a bit of a triangle, so if you gently use your flat nose pliers you can straighten them out again. And that weave will curve quite nicely around the pendant. Now I want to move this wire across into the front of the pendant, and I'll be twisting it as I go. Because the front and the back of this weave are different, to make sure the front's showing on the front of my pendant, I'll flip the weave over and then continue with the 2-2 weave, wrapping twice on the top 2 wires, then twice on the bottom 2 wires. And flattening that weave as I go. I'm just getting up to the top of the pendant now. So it's time to add that bead. I'm going to undo the first 2 wraps on that single wire and just move the weaving wire out of the way, and then bend up that inside wire, which is the longest one, and add the bead. Now I can form that weave around the side of the bead where I want it. And gently twist it and mould it over to the front of the bead at the side there. Now it's got a bit of a corner in it that I don't like. So we can just fix that by using our pliers and gently curving it around. I'm quite happy with where that's sitting, but I need that weave to meet the wire coming out of the bead. So I'll just put a few more wraps on. Make sure that weave's flat. And then I'm going to bend up the backmost wire. And bend the wire coming out of the bead a little, as those 2 will form one side of the bail. I'm then going to put a few more wraps on the remaining 2 wires, just to get them across to the other side of the bow. It doesn't need very many, but all I'm doing here is wrapping both of those wires twice, and then the back wire twice, so it just mirrors the weave we've already got. Then I'll bend those 2 wires up. And we're ready to start making the bail. Now somehow I think my weaving wire broke whilst I was faffing about. I've only got this bit left which won't be enough to weave the bail, so I think I'll add in some new wire now. And I'm going to add 1.5 metres. So I'll just trim off that old end. Then leaving a bit of a tail, I'm going to wrap twice on that inner right hand wire. I'm then going to take the weaving wire over between the 2 sets of wires and wrap the inner wire a couple of times on the other side. Then we're ready to start the bail weave properly. And I'm taking that weaving wire back across under both of the wires on the right hand side, or the top as it is now, over just the outside wire, down between the 2 wires, back to the outside, over both wires, down the main centre section, and then up between those 2 wires. And then over to the other side. So we're going to do the same there. We'll take it under the 2 wires, over just the outside wire, then over both wires, then over the inside wire, and back across to the other side. And we're just going to continue doing this for the bail. As you can see, my base wires are in a V shape, so the bail's getting gradually wider. And if you want more details on this bail, or if you don't like this bail and want some other options, you can take a look at my pendant bails video, which I'll link in a card above. Now the bail's as wide as I want it to be, so I'm just going to bend the wires inwards so they're parallel. You can use your flat nose pliers for this, or you could do it by hand. Just make sure those wires are straight and you're happy with where they are. And then we'll continue that weave as before, going over the outside wire, then both wires, then the inside wire, then down through the middle and under the wires the other side. We've woven a bit further on, and we now need to narrow that bail back down again. So I'll bend the wires back inwards until they cross. And then continue the weave once more. It's exactly the same as we have been doing, but you might need to be a little bit more careful because the wire has a tendency to want to slip forwards. So you just need to make sure you're keeping it in position. And we'll just continue that weave up to where the wires cross. Now that finishes the bail weave, and I'm just going to uncross those wires, and then we're ready to shape the bail. So first we can bend it forwards and then carefully curve it around to form the bail shape. You'll need to bend those excess wires out of the way. And just continue bending until the weave meets itself. I like to just bend it by hand like this, but you could use a mandrel or even your bail making pliers to curve it around if you want. And that's the bail completed. Now that the bead's secure and we have a bail to hang the pendant from, we can concentrate on embellishing the piece. We've got the 2 wires at the bottom to work with and 2 sets of 2 at the back. And I'm going to use these wires in pairs for the embellishment. So I'm going to concentrate first on the top right hand side, and I'll take the wire we've used to weave the bail through to the front to help fix that in place. I can then take it around and between those back 2 wires. We're then going to wrap that outside wire 7 times. Make sure it's compressed so each of those wraps are sitting nicely next to each other. And then we'll wrap both wires twice. Take the wire up through between them and wrap that outside wire, which is the one at the top at the moment, 7 times. Then wrap both wires twice again. And this 7-2 weave is what we're going to be using on each of the pairs of wires. Once we've got that weave started, we can start shaping where those wires will go. And I want to take it around this side, which will just help that bead sit in place. We can then continue that 7-2 weave. Now once we've got that weave around to the front, I want to turn it so those wires are heading back up towards the bail. So we're going to take that outside wire and bend it into a small loop. We can use the round nose pliers to help shape that loop. And then we can take that second wire around the outside of that loop and continue the weave as we go. So I'll pop the 2 double wraps on there. Then we can wrap that single wire quite easily. Bend it so it's meeting the inside wire and wrap around both wires again. And just continue around that curve. Once we get to where the wires are crossing over that previous weave, we can fix the 2 layers together by taking our weaving wire down through that previous weave. And we can use the awl to help make a small space for that. Then we can take that weaving wire around the outside of that bottom weave. And back up to continue the weave where we left off. Now I'm going to leave that part of the embellishment for now and move to those bottom 2 wires. We can start with wrapping both of those wires twice and put the single wraps on what will be the upper wire on the pendant, so the lower one as I'm holding it here. We'll wrap that 7 times, and then we want to turn the weave as before. So we'll make a small loop on that lowermost wire, get it to the size that we want, check that it's sitting where we want it, and then we can continue the weave, putting 2 wraps on both wires. Then wrapping that outside wire 7 times before bending it into place and wrapping both wires again. And we're just going to continue this weave as before. And I want to curve this bit around to end on the left hand side of the pendant. As those wires cross over the previous weave as before, we can take the weaving wire down, make a space with the awl, and thread it back up through the previous weave, before continuing on that top layer. And we're just going to continue that 7-2 weave around that curve that I've made. I think that's far enough for now. So let's move to our final pair of wires. I need a new piece of weaving wire for this, so I'm just going to add that in. I'm just fixing it with a couple of wraps on what's the outside wire coming down from the bail. Then I'll wrap both wires twice. And wrap that outside wire 7 times. And we're just going to do that 7-2 weave on this pair of wires as well. So I've curved those wires around, and I want to bring them to the front of the pendant. And again, that back bit of weaving is just helping to keep the bead in position. As these wires cross over that first bit of weaving that we did, we can take the weaving wire down through that weave, using the awl to make a space. And back up again just to help lock everything together. Then we'll continue that 7-2 weave as before. And I'm going to make a turn in these wires as well. But this time I think I'm going to have the weave going under that previous weave. So I'll carefully thread that first wire through and make the little loop where I want it. Then we can put the single weaves on the outside wire before threading that through as well. And it does make the weave a bit more fiddly to complete around this curve. But you just need to go carefully, making those 2 double wraps and 7 single wraps as before. Or if you prefer, you could just put these wires over the top of the weave. It's all really a matter of design preference. Because these wires are quite tightly held in anyway, I've not bothered tying the 2 layers together this time. And I'll just continue that weave up a little further. And then decide what I want to do with the ends. Now for each pair of wires, I think I'm going to part them slightly and create sort of trumpet flower shapes on the ends. So we can just play around with where the wires are going to be till we're happy with the general layout. So I'm going to wrap that lower wire twice, then take my weaving wire and wrap the top wire twice. Then I'll come back down between the 2 wires and wrap the bottom wire twice. Then take the wire up between those 2 wires to the top and wrap that 3 times, just to start getting around that curve. I'm then going to wrap the bottom wire 3 times. Take the wire up between them and wrap the top wire 4 times. And I'm really just making these wraps to feel my way around the curve. I want both of these wires to be fully wrapped up to where they finish at the edge. So you can just adjust the number of wraps on each of them to accommodate that. This is the basic corset weave. So if you want a bit more detail on that, you can check out my corset weave video, and I'll link that in a card above. To finish off these ends, I'm going to make 2 small loops. I can make these by hand. But you can use your round nose pliers to help. Then I'll trim off the ends so we've got a full loop. And I want to fix this flower to the previous weave. So we can use the awl to make a space and take that weaving wire through. Then we can bring it around the side of the weave there, back up to the front. Just make sure it's in position and sitting nicely. And just wrap a few more times on that loop before taking the weaving wire through and down to the bottom loop. Just open that loop a little bit to help get that wire through. Then we can put a few more wraps around that loop and fix that to the weave below by threading the wire through as before. Make sure that's sitting nicely, and then we can wrap 3 more times around that loop to finish. Trim that weaving wire off. Make sure the end's tucked in, and then we can move to our next flower. And we're just going to use the corset weave on these in exactly the same way. I'm tending to start with 2 wraps on each wire because they're quite close together. But then I'll quite quickly move to 3 wraps, just to space out the weave bit. Again, the number of wraps you've got on each wire depends on the shape of your flower. So you really just need to decide what looks right for you. I'll trim those base wires. Then take that weaving wire through to fix the ends as before. And then we can weave this final flower in exactly the same way using the corset stitch. Making those loops at the ends and attaching them together. And for this inside wire, I'm attaching it to the other flower. We'll make that final loop. Attach it to that first weave and wrap 3 more times to finish. We can then make final adjustments to make sure those flowers are sitting where we want them. And the pendant's finished. Now we can leave it as bare copper like this, or as I'm going to do, add some patina with liver of sulphur. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel and head over to my website for more hints, tips and projects. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.